Welcome to the Women's Heart Health Summit. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Menolascino of the Meno Clinic in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. This is your chance to hear from international world experts about how to achieve optimal health, optimal vitality, and prevent heart disease. We're joined today by Niki Gratrix. She's a famous worldwide consular, lecturer, and I think you're going to really enjoy the wisdom that she shares today. Thank you so much for joining us, Niki.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. Let me tell our viewers a little bit about your diverse background and excellent accomplishments. Niki Gratrix is an award-winning, internationally renowned transformation coach, nutritional therapist, and bioenergetic practitioner, helping people to optimize energy. Since 2004, she's completed over 10,000 consultations in over 40 countries around the world, helping people to achieve and overcome their fatigue, to get their lives back, live an abundant and fulfilling life. Niki is passionate about using both psycho-emotional, energetic, and physical approaches for a truly comprehensive, radically holistic approach to abundant energy and health. She's known for being able to identify and articulate how the mind and body work together as one unit, helping people to connect all the dots and moving them along in their healing journey. In 2005, she co-founded one of the largest mind-body clinics in integrative medicine in the United Kingdom. The results with patients and the clinic were later published as a study in 2012 in the British Medical Journal. In August 2015, she hosted the largest ever free online health summit on overcoming fatigue, interviewing 29 world experts on optimizing energy with over 30,000 attendees. Niki has been the recipient of 2 O work visas from the USA, granted only to people who can demonstrate extraordinary ability in their field. And again, Niki, so much, I welcome you to our summit. Thank you so much for being here. And I think all our viewers are going to really enjoy listening to you today.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm really happy to talk on this topic. It's so important, and thank you for doing the summit.
Well, you know, women's health, with what we're taught as MDs in the U.S., we treat everybody the same, and that's one of the problems with heart disease. In your work, how do you help women to really get grounded as unique individuals, and what are some of the strategies that you use to help them to be empowered as individuals?
That's a great question, and because of my passion about really the impact of psychology, the mind, and our emotions, and how that is, the body and the mind are really one thing. So one of the things that I help women and men to do, but most of my clients are women, is help them to identify patterns and identify how what they're thinking, feeling, even though very important, their childhood experience can have a profound impact on health. And that covers everything from touching on lifestyle, dietary aspects, lifestyle aspects, but also who they are in the world and how they're going about their life, like what's working, what's not working, how positive they feel on a regular basis, and how stressed they are. Because if you're just focusing on the biochemistry, you're not going to get the best out of the biochemistry if the nervous system is in a chronic state of sympathetic nervous system stress all the time. You're not in a healing state. And so I talk all the time with my clients about, are you in a stress state or a healing state? Stress state, healing state. You need to be in the healing state, obviously, to allow everything that's happening on the biochemistry, the diet, other things you're doing, to optimize that. You need to be in a healing state, and a lot of people aren't in a healing state.
Well, I know in the U.S. in medicine and really all over the world, the medical doctors are so focused on the biochemistry and the science of it, they forget the heart in it. And having someone on a team that can really address those issues, I think that's more important than all the other things that we do in integrative and functional medicine, is being able to address that, including what happened as a child and a long time ago. How do you help women to see how what's happened in the past affects what they're doing presently in the future?
So that's a really important question. And actually part of it is the education process, like the pre-education process. Like people need to be clued up. Like I might ask them quite personal questions about what's going on with their private life and so on. And they need to understand that why we're doing that, and that they then feel safe and that they can trust to do it. And one of the things I always share, and I think this is one of the most important studies ever done in medicine, was a study called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, the ACEs study. And we hear a lot about mind-body medicine, but I don't think people know enough about this particular study. And it blows everything out of the water. If you think that how you feel and how you think doesn't affect your health, this is the study that really confirms that. So just briefly, it was a study done mainstream CDC, Kaiser Permanente, 17,500 adults in the US, and they essentially looked at early life stress and correlated that with adult onset chronic complex illness in adulthood. And essentially, if you had a high level of adversity in childhood, you have a dramatic increased risk of 7 out of the top 10 causes of death. If you had a moderate level of adversity in childhood, you have a 20-year reduction in lifespan. If you have, and we'll talk about what ACEs are, adverse childhood experiences, but if you had, for example, 8 ACEs, that's very high, you've got 3 times the risk of heart disease and 3.5 times the risk of lung cancer in adulthood. And it was crazy. 4 ACEs is the 400% increase in depression, Alzheimer's. It was just across the board. And what are we talking about? We're talking about things like parents separating and divorce. How common is that? I think 50% of the audience may have experienced that as a child. Physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, witnessing domestic violence, things like incarceration of a family member, mental illness in the family, or substance abuse. And that wasn't an exhaustive list. That was just 10 categories that the researchers kind of picked together because there was other research on it. So, and the issue is with that type of early life stress, it causes a neuroendocrine immune system reset. It changes the nervous system so that we're in more of a chronic state of stress. So we get to adulthood, we've already got internal kind of endogenous sources of stress that will reset from childhood. And how we are in childhood affects how well we cope with stress in adulthood. Do we have certain personality traits that are actually survival strategies from a difficult childhood that allowed us to survive in childhood, but in adulthood are actually maladaptive and are making us worse? They're no longer relevant. So you asked about how do I help people identify if they've had early life stress. One is you can do your ACE score, and you can just go online, and we can talk about that at the end. I've got a free link on my website. You can just tot up and start to think about it, and what happened to me in childhood and how did I respond? So certain survival strategies may be things like being an overachiever, never taking time out, not putting time in for relaxation, which is so common here in the US, right? And, the Western world.
So, Nikki, thank you so much for sharing with us about the ACE score. It's something we've talked about with some other speakers, and I do feel it's so important. Do some of your clients not even know about these events that happen to them and are stuck as adults or have these health issues as an adult, even though that there may be an event or a situation they weren't aware of as a child?
Yeah, so that's a key point. It's very difficult sometimes to know if you've experienced certain type of trauma, especially emotional neglect, which is very common. It's probably at epidemic levels. And, even a simple ACE questionnaire looking at adverse childhood events where you ask somebody, did you experience emotional neglect as a child? How would you know that? And how would you know to self-report it if your parents, didn't respond in a particular way? How should you have known? And you tend to only end up finding out is by having maybe some kind of health issue, and then sort of starting to dig in and speaking and researching. And then you start to look at the signs and symptoms of somebody who may have experienced emotional neglect. And then you start to add the dots together. So it's an exploration process.
So I love the way you approach clients, and particularly women, because women have so many facets to something like a mood disorder, whether it's depression or anxiety. It's not just a serotonin deficiency. It's all of these other systems that are out of balance. Is that how you see it as well?
It's very multifactorial. So all, you know, these days we're not just looking at a singular, say, organ or even a single hormone that's out of balance. You know, especially when I'm really talking about stress, and the stress has a sort of multifactorial impact on the body. It affects multiple systems and organs. So the brain might change, then the nervous system goes into more of the fight, flight, stress state response. The lovely vagus nerve and the vagal tone starts to kind of reduce, and that has a ton of other impacts on the body. Everything from increasing the chances of things like leaky gut, suppressing immunity at the same time as creating this potentially an inflammatory, excessive inflammation in the body. Really changes everything. It would sort of downregulate certain hormones and upregulate the stress hormones, sometimes at the cost of the sex hormones, for example. So it's very multifactorial, and stress, even though it's sort of that everybody experiences it, it's actually having a multifactorial impact. So a whole set of different things are going wrong in the body, with an end outcome that you might get, you know, a diagnosis on one particular thing, but it's everything else has gone out of whack too. I hope that makes sense.
It does, Nikki. And your clients are so fortunate when they must find you. They must feel like they've gone to heaven. They finally can find someone who can tie the science to the emotion, to the stress, to the history. There's very few people that can do that, Nikki. And the fact that you can tie all these together, the more people you work with, do you see these patterns? Are they easier for you to see because it's also tied together?
Yes. And, you know, it's very interesting. My background was working with chronic fatigue syndrome, and fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, the very extreme end of fatigue. And it was a study in stress and how that affects the body. And I got to see sort of all aspects of, I could see how a person dealt with their lives, whether they were kind of being like the achiever type, as I call it, or the giver type, always putting everyone else before themselves. So pattern recognition of actual personality traits and approaches and then you would see like commonalities in health issues that they would have through a particular adaptive sort of personality style. So that's one aspect of it. If someone has those personality proneness, those traits, you are going to see an increased level of stress in the body. And then how that manifests in illness just depends on, I guess, you could call it their genetic weak link. Does it go into being more of a brain disorder, heart disorders, or does it become a fatigue, fibromyalgia type condition? So it's kind of this mixture of stress, probably throw some toxins in there as well, and then with the genetic propensity. So it's a big picture. It's keeping the big picture in mind, and helping people to connect the dots so they don't get reductionistic and just, it really blows out of the water the idea that you can just, you know, fix something with a pill, you know, a pill for every ill. When people really see the full context of their health existing in a social context as well as the mental context, it kind of changes everything.
Well, I feel that women, especially that suffer from chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, are some of the least understood clients that show up to a doctor's office. A lot of them are dismissed. It's all in their head. They just need a better antidepressant. So it seems like a lot of these women are dismissed when they come in with those labels to the doctor's office. And it really takes a whole person approach like you're providing. How are you able to start to see those patterns in someone with, for example, fibromyalgia? And do you see that 10 different women or 10 women with the same diagnosis of fibromyalgia may have 10 different routes to get there?
Yes. So with, for example, fibromyalgia, there's a friend of mine, Dr. David Brady, who's an expert in fibromyalgia, and he's actually at the point now where he'd say someone does not have true classical fibromyalgia unless they've had trauma, some kind of emotional trauma, and the emotional trauma is the physical trauma, right? If they don't have that, they will have some other, you know, kind of functional imbalances. But fibromyalgia very much, this is where the mind body, it's almost symbolic. So we have this unresolved trauma, this unresolved emotion that gets translated into physical pain because it hasn't been dealt with at the emotional level. So it gets shunted into the body, if you like, that expresses it as pain physically, but it's a message that something emotionally hasn't been addressed. And you can say, first of all, as soon as somebody has fibromyalgia, you've got a whole lot of information right there. And then obviously you start to look at people's history, and you start to ask them about that, and encourage them in a gentle, safe way to explore their own history, starting with doing something like an ACE score, but other things people can do. I work a lot with a system called the Enneagram personality typing system, which is used by a lot of psychologists, and it's just a way of identifying just certain traits. It's not about categorizing, it's about identifying.
Can you tell us more about that, Niki? Tell us more about that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, so this system of 9 personality types, they actually fits very much into certain, this was coming from chronic fatigue research, but like a type 1 is the perfectionist. And they create a lot of stress, internal stress, because they kind of have a semi-conscious drive or map driving their behavior that they're not always aware of, that if they do everything right, they'll be okay. And underneath that it usually comes from a childhood experience, but feeling if you weren't validated and you got a lot of criticism and you kind of were on the borderline of too much criticism, quite harsh upbringing, you can then start to identify as being bad or defective. So the way that you overcome that is I've got to do everything perfectly and then I'll be okay, right? So it's a lack of self-love ultimately. So it's those are deep. This is quite deep stuff. It's deep patterns.
I bet a lot of people identify that that are listening right now.
Yes, and that leads to both beliefs and behaviors that are destructive to health, can be destructive to health. So, and that's what we're looking for. There's always a balance, but there's going too far and then it's becoming destructive. So it might be, again, putting huge amounts of pressure on yourself constantly, not having time to take out, to do things that stimulate the healthy healing state of the vagus nerve, for example. So instead of and we're frightened, we're driven by fear. We're driven by the fear. We're in survival brain, fearing we're going to get it wrong at any moment. So that's type 1. It's the perfectionist type. Another very common one, and this is a big one, a lot of women fall into this one, the giver type. And the givers they're usually empathic, they care about other people, but they tend to put everybody else first before their own needs. And you see a lot of therapists like this too. And in childhood, the interesting experience is often there was a degree of neglect, and they learned how to get love by giving it first. So if I give love, I've noticed I get something back. But again, there was a degree of neglect there, like we didn't experience unconditional love. So then there becomes an attachment to that, where we must look after everybody else, and we lose that. It's almost a cliche, but that core feeling of knowing you can't help other people if you don't help yourself first. If you don't have energy, if you don't have health, and you never look after yourself, you don't make time for yourself, prioritize, schedule in self-care, then you're going to end up ill, and the other people will suffer because of that. So it's that balance. It's the balance between enough self-care. So I see a lot of that in chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, a lot of giver types, completely different from the perfectionist or the type 3, the achiever type. That's a very common one you see as well. People who are driven by their human doings. I call them kind of human doings. Well, a lot of us relate to this too. Like maybe if we're getting our self-worth from external achievements, and our belief systems and well-being is reliant on these external achievements, again, that can create a lot of pressure, never stopping, because it's emotionally painful. If we stop, we are right in fear again that we're unlovable. But it's a self-worth issue for type 3s. It's self-worth. Again, childhood experience, they were rewarded for doing and achieving. So it's status orientated. So those types of things lead to health issues through behavior and internal beliefs. Like ultimately, if we don't love ourselves as we are, then we can the body knows this and will start to manifest a physical expression of illness, because we're out of balance, so the body's out of balance.
And Niki, are a lot of the clients you see, they have different pieces of each of these types, and that a different type manifests at different time in their lives as well?
That's a really good question. Yes, everybody's got a little bit of some of that. in them. And so people might relate to all of the above.
I think I do.
Yeah, there's often one that is kind of underlying, it takes some intuition to get it. But very much what you say is true. Under certain circumstances, I think we've all experienced this. And under certain circumstances, we might be, shall we say, triggered, and we just realize we behave like maybe a 10-year-old in response to something that we're like, what happened just there? I seem to be hijacked and my adulthood left me. So we sort of do have these sub-personalities that come into play to help us deal with different life situations. And you can totally have somebody who's there could be a total achiever type in their workplace, and then there could be a completely submissive, loving, caring person in the family environment. So it's, and how we respond to stress, obviously, and the levels of stress are going to be different at different times. So yeah, it's not a fixed thing.
And do you feel, Niki, that the pressures on women seem to be so much, they've always been difficult, but there's so much pressure on women today to be the perfect friend, the perfect mom, the perfect partner, the perfect worker, and their needs really come last for a lot of women. How do you help teach them to put themselves first?
Yeah, it actually takes courage. It takes courage to acknowledge if your life isn't working properly and you have health issues that might require these lifestyle changes. And sometimes it's not always easy. It's, a health crisis can often cause us to start looking at everything, diet, lifestyle, what we're doing in our life, who we're hanging out with, very important as well. And then when we start to make changes, it can be disruptive. It's like creative destruction in our life so that we can get rid of things that aren't supporting us. But, that can cause disruption. It's maybe partners, maybe people that have got used to us being a certain way with them. And we're like, I'm going to change this because I need to feel better and I need to have better health. And some people aren't always supportive, usually because it puts them, the spotlight comes on them and then they kind of are looking at themselves as well. So it's an understanding that it takes courage and that, to let go of the illusion, everyone else's life is usually pretty screwed up as well. So let them end up kind of dealing with their stuff. And I always talk to clients about, once you're exuding a certain amount of health and joy, and you've had to make some difficult choices and decisions and changes, once you're living that, other people are going to look at you and be like, wow, how's she doing that? But you're not going to, there's certain, it has to be realistic as well. It's, if you're going to be a high-flying, top-class lawyer in a law firm, those people work serious hours and they work nonstop. That's a personal decision for a woman if she chooses to do that. My personal opinion is that a woman doesn't have to choose that. She might not want to do that. She might want to do something completely, different, and that allows her to spend more time self-nurturing and being there for her family more. And that's not a failure. That's a conscious decision to acknowledge what makes her happy or not. So, I think there's a movement going on around women about that. It was great we were given the equal opportunities, but the outcome isn't going to necessarily be equal. It's good that we have equal opportunities, but one woman will choose to be in a very sort of pressured, competitive, male type of environment. She'll do that her whole life and she'll be happy, and that's her thing. But for the rest of us, we might not choose that. And it's really, that's finding out who you are and have the courage to be that, even when other people might not agree with you, and then to kind of let those people go if they don't support you. So they need to be around supportive people. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's how I'm kind of helping women to kind of let go of an external idea about who they should be and listen to what makes them happy and start to tune in to what makes them happy.
I love your messaging, Niki. I love the way you think and the way your words are so empowering. I think it's very, for all our viewers, I hope they're really taking this to heart. And the idea that you can be whatever you want to be. There may be some challenges, but you don't have to be what other people want you to be. I have a lot of clients that they are empathic, and I tell them, wouldn't it just be better if you didn't care? Your life would be so much easier. There'd be so much pain.
Yes.
But they do care, and it is a burden for a lot of people. What are some of the strategies they can do to help them to buffer that, besides understanding their past and accepting their present and their own goals? How do you help women to come to terms and to have strategies to empower them with this?
Yeah, so I would say, especially for the empath types, boundaries are really important, both communicating, like, so knowing, first of all, knowing what you need. I start to tune in, identify, and connect with your needs, which often starts with spending time alone and having, scheduling that time in. Usually we're quite scheduling, very important, because it just doesn't happen otherwise. You have to cultivate this. You have to cultivate positive emotions and kind of cultivate time alone. Otherwise it really won't happen. Everybody else will just, you know, take over your time with their demands and so on. So scheduling in time alone, even like writing lists of what do you enjoy doing that you haven't been doing, that you know you would love to do and to be doing on a regular basis. And that might be things that help health that you enjoy, but also, you know, things that feed your soul, feed the heart. So once you've got that, you are then start to know who you are. Then you've got a boundary you can articulate, and that's very important as well. Articulation, the communication. That's what I call it, like non-violent communication. So don't expect other people to, you know, kind of mind read that that's what you need, because how would they were supposed to know if you didn't even know yourself, because you never spent time alone to find out what you needed. So then communicating in a non-judgmental way of like, these are my needs, and you know, once a week I'm going to disappear for 2 hours on a Sunday morning. I want the family to be taken care of. I'm going to have you know, just so the whole family can support that. So knowing what you need, knowing the boundaries and articulating them is part of that. And just when I say tuning in, like noticing what feeds you and what drains you. And that can be people, that can be certain foods, it can be just certain activities. Being in crowds sometimes is very relevant to an empath type. Because they're so sensitive, it's kind of knowing like what does and doesn't feed them. With empaths, by the way, I have a little, I call them the orchid children, because it's like orchid children, they're sensitive, but a lot of them think, oh, it's a weakness, I'm so sensitive, it's weakness, and it's this burden. And it's not at all. It's actually a great gift. And there's empirical science research showing that there are kids that are orchids versus kids that are dandelions. And dandelions can like sort of grow anywhere in tough environments. Orchids aren't quite the same. They're more sensitive and they need the kind of greenhouse care. But when they get the greenhouse care, they outperform the dandelions.
I love that. Love that.
It's so awesome. I always talk about the orchid children. So if you're an empath or a sensitive type, you seem to react to everything, other people, chemicals, food, it's actually probably because you have this exquisitely attuned nervous system that is going to give you a gift of something you can give back to society that all the dandelions actually don't have. And that's empirically proven in children who've got the greenhouse care. So it's like you've got a Ferrari, other people have Land Rovers, and you can't drive off road with that Ferrari, right? But the Land Rovers can't go 200 miles an hour down a straight road, right? So I always just know your make and model, know who you are, and then you can minimize the risk and optimize what you have.
I hear a lot of acceptance in what you're saying about all of us really finding out who we are, what we are, how we got here, and then having acceptance for our strengths and our weaknesses and letting them all play together to be manifest as best as possible. I love how you think, Niki. That's a very empowering thought for people.
Yeah, and I hope it's through the acceptance, through the identification, the acknowledgement, and the acceptance, you actually, paradoxically, you need that for change. Like if you're resisting, you can see something and you are constantly having a down on yourself about it or resisting it because you're trying to push it away and you hate that part of you. It's a bit like what you resist persists. So it's a kind of, I guess, a degree of emotional mastery is kind of going with the flow with things. So you do sort of see something and go, okay, well, and then the compassion piece, because usually the stuff that you don't like, it's usually come from an adaptive strategy from childhood that allowed you to survive. So it's not your fault. It was an environmental failure. That's I find that such a huge piece. It's almost like so many people actually suffer from self-love deficit disorder. That's the cause of most chronic complex illness. That's my view, my belief. I think self-love deficit disorder is a huge piece, and love is medicine. And, I could quote science studies that would, totally back that up completely. So
you're quoting Bernie Siegel's title of his book, Love is Medicine. And you said a couple metaphors here. You kind of snuck them in quickly, and I want to share them with everyone. The self-love deficit disorder. I think that's just an amazing thought process, how we don't appreciate our good. You know, I've heard someone talk about the carrot and the stick, that when we lay in bed, why do we think about the one thing that went wrong that day versus cherishing the 10 great things that we did that day? And it's the carrot and stick that evolutionarily, we know there'll be another carrot tomorrow, that we can always get the carrot and get the reward. But if the stick gets us today, we don't get a second shot. And do you see that a lot in clients where they're almost hardwired to ruminate on their lack of success rather than to really champion and empower them with their success?
Absolutely. It's an epidemic of being in, I call that survival brain, the kind of like in fear all the time and assuming the worst, and the kind of pessimism and so on. That's kind of as if if we stop worrying, something's going to go wrong. Right? So we have to keep worrying because somehow that makes us safe. It's not rational at all. It's sort of an amygdala hijack, I call it, kind of the emotions, hijacking a part of the rational brain. But it is a tough life. Life is difficult. It can be. It's not an inherently safe place, and it is something that takes courage. You can have like naive courage. That's when we're young and nothing's gone wrong yet. Mm-hmm. And we sort of seem fearless, and then we'll take some knocks. You might be a loss of a job, loss of a loved one, a divorce, a health crisis, and then to come back from that and get back into life and trust again, now that's true courage and strength, because it's not just this naive, it's not based on naivety anyway, it takes wisdom. So I always say, I think life is it's not a safe place we come into. Just look at the crazy stuff going on, internationally, politically, and everything at the moment. So learning to cultivate that, it really is, you are kind of going against mass consciousness, you're going against the grain, which is all the more why it's important to have this structured focus and time on cultivating positive states, cultivating time to actually stop, slow down, and do something that just really feels good. Make sure you do one thing a day that you love to do. Time in nature. I mean, this amazing picture that's right behind you, there's so many science papers about the power of nature to calm the nervous system down. It increases endorphins, it reduces depression. The sunlight and the earth, these are huge supports that are free, that will help you just balance out. When sometimes the most that we need to do is just go for a walk outside, and it's such an underestimated support for us, and it's right there. So things like time in nature and things that you love to do, walking on the beach, pets, time with pets, positive social relations. Gratitude journaling is a way to cultivate getting to that positive state, because our default is to do what you said and go into the negative. Get up in the morning and do 5 things that you love to do, like put some essential oils on, they lift the mood. Put some bright lights on to lift do some yoga stretches, maybe some intentions for the day, and some gratitude journaling. Great, that'll set you up for the day. That's one of the things I get my clients to do, like a morning routine.
You have so many great pearls for people, and I hope they're writing all of these down. You're talking about really the self-care and also resilience. And if I may ask you more about both of those, the allowing ourselves, the doing good things for ourselves, and like you say, just go for a walk, just do some exercise, ideally with your dog. Dogs get more people healthy than I do, or do it with your friend, your lover, your family member. This socialness, I think we don't really appreciate how healthy good social relationships really are. And
yes,
you do that too?
It's gigantic. There's an amazing study about the quality of your social relations is a greater indicator of survival rates than how much you exercise, your BMI, things like cholesterol, and whether you smoke 15 cigarettes a day. And that was a 300,000 person meta study, right, about the impact of social relations. So it's actually one of the most important aspects of mind-body medicine. It's one of the most robust science findings, is that if you are isolated or there's conflictual social relations, it's basically you're right there. You're going to switch down your immune system. It's going to suppress parts of the immune system. You're going to have inflammation in other areas. You know, this total connection that's going on between the brain, the nervous system, and the immune system. And it's totally it's one thing. It's bidirectional, and your cells are listening to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, truly. So suddenly you sort of get a weird, you know, I've got backache, I'm getting pains and so on. And it's like often people weren't connected to that argument you had with that person. You know, maybe you're feeling trapped. That's a classic cause of back pain, for example. So I'm talking a bit slightly shallowly there, but social relations. If you are in a health crisis, for example, I mentioned it, I touched on it before. It can be one of the biggest reasons why people don't recover. Other people, I call it OP. Other people, because people don't, you know, some people would rather be ill than tell their emotional truth to a partner or a family environment. And then you've got cultural aspects coming into that as well. You know, so, you know, humans, we don't exist in a vacuum. We have this social context, and it has a profound impact on our well-being.
You're so right. And I just love the way you connect the dots. You do it in such an eloquent, beautiful way that's empowering. The concept you mentioned earlier of resilience, there's a lot of great studies on resilience, and it's something that you either have or you don't, or is it something that you can build if you don't have it? What are your thoughts on that?
I think you can definitely build resilience. So it's interesting that if you have a certain amount of stress in your life, it's a bit like vaccines. You kind of learn, so you build some resilience. So you don't want no stress. You want a little bit of stress so that you can, you know, that's why we don't want to overprotect our kids and so on either. So, because it gives them the life lessons to build strength.
Yes.
Here's a really interesting thing. The quality of your social relations with your key caregivers actually trumps PTSD type trauma, meaning if you have really great social relations with your parents and then a one-off discrete traumatic event happens, like an assault or a rape or something very negative like that, a one-off discrete issue, you're much, much less likely to develop PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, if you have a really, like, people are there for you. You feel seen, you feel loved. So we call that developmental relational health. And when that goes wrong, when we have relational trauma, there isn't the seeingness, they don't feel connected, there isn't the social connection with the key caregivers. That means you're much likely to have less resilience to traumatic events in adulthood. That's what I was trying to get to there. So a lot of resilience is built from, you know, having social relations. It's not that bad things won't happen. They do. Bad things happen. But if you have learned to it sort of almost absorb the love from the parents because you can see and feel it, and it's an emotional attunement, then you're going to be much more resilient in adulthood. On the one hand, we have something very interesting, which is which we can talk about, but post-traumatic growth is something completely different, and that's very interesting. We can touch on that too.
Please tell me more about that.
Well, post-traumatic growth is where an incident happens and it absolutely flattens you. There's no resilience. You know, you didn't have resilience. It brought you to your knees. And that's it can be a total call to transformation. So it can be a total transformative experience. So there's one thing which is resilience, and that's where resilience means a bad thing happens and we kind of bounce back and we kind of cope with it and we move on. But a lot of us get smacked, you know, and we get kind of brought to our knees. But we can experience post-traumatic growth, meaning we take that experience that kind of knocked us to our knees and kind of devastated us, and we can use that in a very empowering way to transform ourselves, our life. Maybe it's something we go out and do in the world afterwards. So it's good for people to know that both of those things are possible. Like, you can have resilience, and you can build resilience and build that in, but also even if something knocks you back, there's this thing called post-traumatic stress, and there are people actually observing that and how it happens. There's actually a great book by, I believe it's Matthew Sanford, and he's a yoga instructor, a paraplegic yoga instructor. And his book is great. It's the essence of that post-traumatic growth. So, you know, I actually think there's an amazing lady called Andrea Nakayama, and she runs a functional medicine nutrition.
I love her. Yes.
Yes. And she talks about the death of her husband who died of brain cancer, and he was very young, and they just had a young child. And she's an epitome of what you can do with post-traumatic growth, something devastating. And she took all that, and now she trains thousands of practitioners to prevent things like brain tumors. That's what I mean about post-traumatic growth.
Well, Niki, what a great story of that. And for everyone viewing, what I'd like to ask, if I may, is, you know, you're talking about your nurture can overcome your nature. And
Yes.
you can build in these resiliency techniques that if you do have something traumatic happen, you may actually grow from it. So part of it is your nature, that some people are wired that that's going to happen, or they're going to allow it to. But there are things that you can do. As a parent, what are the things I can do for my child to help them to build that resilience, to build a nurturing base, to help if something were to happen, that they would have a more likelihood to move into the post-traumatic growth rather than the PTSD. Does that make sense?
Yes. So the most important thing is it's this bonding and attachment with children. So it's an amazing thing that only 50% of kids actually emotionally bond with mom. It's crazy. These huge studies done. Yeah. So most children are actually growing up with attachment trauma, which is part of this developmental trauma, which means it's all relational. And there are things called mirror neurons, where if you have empathy within you, and you express that to your child, their mirror neurons will match yours. So your child's more likely to build empathy if you have it, and you interact together with that. So we have these mirror neurons. When mother is not empathic, and maybe she's whatever, she might be with a young baby and kind of depressed and not in a connected state, then that's when the issues start. So really it's I would say it's being emotionally attuned to your children, like being able to connect with them, and, you know, as best you can, because not all kids want to kind of express their emotions to you exactly. It depends what stage they're at, but you know, kids being seen, emotionally validated, emotionally seen and understood. So even when bad things happen, they feel safe and connected, because bad things are going to happen. That's life. It's a tough life we live in. But it's the social support that will trump things like developing PTSD, you know, in response to bad things happening. So, and I think that speaks to the self-love deficit again. Mm-hmm. You know, kids need to be seen. They need to be encouraged. They need to be validated. This, you know, touch and physical connection is very important as well. You know, not always asking how often do we ask our kids, how are you feeling today? I never got that asked that as a child, right? I asked people, how many times have you asked how you felt? So asking our kids, how are you feeling today? You know, try that one. And actually, you know, if they feel safe and connected, it's when we don't bond in that way, emotional attunement, that's when the self-love deficit disorder develops in the child. And now she or he's not resilient. And now when things go wrong, which they will, one stage or another, you know, when you have a bankruptcy, do you feel like a shameful failure, which is going to lead to things like PTSD? Or do you kind of have a bit more of an optimistic view, you know, and kind of like, oh, well, you know, it's not all my fault, these things happen, which they do. And you kind of bounce back and you get on with life. And what's the difference? Somebody collapses just as somebody doesn't, is the internal resilience, and essentially how much, you know, the shame is the opposite of self-love. And if you're kind of being shamed, it's one of the worst things I think that comes from childhood experience, like this lack of connection, and then it's core shaming, it's personality identity, identifying with being a bad person rather than I did a bad thing. And it's incredibly common. So yeah, I hope that made sense.
It does. And I think there's an epidemic of shame and shaming that goes on in our culture. And I think I see a lot of kids. You know, one of my favorite people, David Bleiweiss, a physician, he taught me with his daughter, he would say, well, how does that make you feel? How does that make you feel? When she would tell him. So he was always asking the feeling rather than trying to fix the problem. He was just asking her to open up about how she was feeling about it, and never gave her the answer or the fix for her. And I thought that was, we talk about not shoulding on people, telling them they should do this, they should do that, but asking how they feel about it and how can we help that feeling rather than
Yes.
fixing that.
Exactly that. So, sometimes that's more important. Sometimes that is the fix. Just having somebody be able to emotionally express and be seen and heard, and they feel understood and to be seen. And that's one dimension of love. That's an expression of love. You can't love somebody if the other person doesn't feel seen, validated, or understood. You can say it, you can go and buy things for them, can try and make it up for that, but there's always going to be an emptiness there. And it's a form of emotional intelligence, and I don't think we're a very emotionally intelligent society right now. So
Nikki, how come life doesn't come with an owner's manual or a user's manual?
I know.
We all need someone like you to help us figure all this out, because is it really that complicated, or do we make it so complicated?
I think these are pretty crazy making times, but I think there are some enduring kind of wisdoms, things that are never going to go away, that if you just stay connected to those, you can kind of stay grounded through all the kind of craziness. So there are enduring values, enduring things that actually do work. Leading a relatively simple life, looking at some of our strategies of like, what are all the things we're trying to do to earn love? Why don't we just give it to ourselves without going through all that first?
I love that.
There's a simplicity. And I think, boy, do we need that. Going back to a little bit more of the simple principles, the overwhelming stuff we have with all the computers, the Wi-Fi, the EMF stuff, the chemicals in the environment, the more we go back to nature, go back to a little bit slower, slightly simpler life, the more we can do that. And it doesn't have to be boring. It's actually going to uplift and feed. The body needs that for health as much as we need it for emotional health as well. So I think embodying some of that it is very simple actually, but we sort of make it complex because we've forgotten how to do it. We've forgotten how to relax.
And you mentioned toxicity, whether it be chemical, emotional, EMF, electronic. Do you feel like that's a catalyst to all of this? Is it another layer to it? How does that interact with this emotionality?
I think it's one of these contributing factors. So you've got the emotional stuff, which is the stress coming in. If you sort of throw in some exposure to toxins, which is reducing, the more stressed we are from all our emotional stuff, we reduce resilience to things like toxins in the environment and everything, really. So, it's like another load on the boat. So how many loads on the boat do you have? Because eventually it's going to sink, right? So how much emotional stuff from childhood, how much stress have you just got right now in your life because you don't really schedule in time to slow down? How much chemical exposure is also coming in, including EMF as well as chemicals and Wi-Fi and stuff. So, kind of thing. How much lack of sunlight are you getting? How much no time in nature? Circadian rhythm management, how much the timings you're going to bed, making sure you're not getting blue light at night, which is just turning out to be disastrous. That's one way to take care of your kids. Like, no blue light once it gets dark. And get the bright light first thing in the morning. It's kind of evolutionary from an evolutionary perspective. That's how we evolved, right? To have these simple things, like we had campfire at night, that's orange light, none of these screens and blue screens. And then we woke up with the sunlight. So just going back to some of the basics, and you'll start to feel amazing when you start to live some of this stuff and just integrate it in. So we don't want to get stressed about the chemical thing either. So, because I'm, being just aware about how powerful the mind is. If you think something's going to have a terrible impact on us, you're going to increase it. So if we don't if we bring in awareness and just a rational decision making around these things, just not getting into stress and fear about it, just make decisions to go, okay, I'm going to get a water filter. I'm going to use an air filter. I'm going to try and avoid GMO where I can. I'm going to, this kind of thing, you just make decisions, slowly integrate them into your life. And then there's this synergistic effect when all of this starts to build together. Mm-hmm. You've got a circadian rhythm, you're stimulating the vagus nerve every day, you've got a great diet, you're doing positive, you just start to feel amazing. So, it's well worth it, just, one step at a time. But yeah, very much think multifactorially. So I don't just say it's all about the mind and downplaying important things like diet and toxicity. That's important to address too.
Well, I love your messaging about don't beat yourself up if you're not perfect.
Yeah, you just have to be good enough as a parent, as a person in life.
Just be good enough. I don't think we hear that enough.
Yeah, not in the US.
Okay.
The US are all like super achievers, and like in the US, and it's causing a lot of stress for people that actually is not helpful. And then putting these external standards, and then constantly we're falling short on the inside of them. And so, yeah, becoming aware that's another pattern. It's another way to be in self-love deficit.
Self-love deficit. Again, you have these terms that I've not heard before that really sum up. It's a lot of wisdom in your words, Niki. It really is. I love it.
Oh, thank you.
I also love your comment about the campfire. That I've heard a lot of people talk about blue light and different lights, but this idea of going to sleep to the glow of the orange campfire and waking up to the natural light of the sun. I think for me, and I always thought it was maybe just sleeping on the ground camping, but I always feel better the day after I camp because I'm laying on the ground, but it may be a lot to do with the way that my body likes that light. It likes the orange glow at night and the sun.
Absolutely. The earth there's like earth frequencies, like, you may have heard of something called the Schumann resonance. There is actually a magnetic field around the earth that's essential for health, essential for the physical health of the body. So, most people have noticed when they're walking on the beach barefoot, they sort of feel really good and they get springy, that's being connected to the earth like that. It's a huge recharge. It's an energetic recharge, and it's extremely healing.
How about this concept of earthing, about grounding, like you're talking about? Is that really what you're talking about?
It's actually two separate things. One is the theory about earthing, which is the idea we're actually getting electrons, negative electrons, which is, they're saying it's kind of like antioxidants in the body. Yeah. So negative electrons the earth is a big source of these negative electrons. And then you have the earth frequencies, which is more just the magnetic fields, and that we can block those as well by, being in a train or a car, it will block those fields, or always having shoes that don't conduct. So the frequencies are very important as well. It's actually NASA did some of the research on this, because of course the astronauts were connected to earth frequency and they were getting weaker and sicker. So this sort of pulsed electromagnetic frequency is a type of therapy, and there's tons of science papers on that. But it's not surprising, because it's just something it's something in nature that is essential for health, which is earth frequencies. And just that's why we're not joking about what just being in nature can do for your health and to keep you in balance. That, and we drastically have underestimated sunlight. And we've been told, oh, it's bad, we're going to get cancer. And that's just not what the data, the science isn't showing that anymore, right? It's completely showing that it's helpful in so many ways. So it actually charges, I think the sunlight charges our cells. It causes the water in our body, and we're 72% water, right? It actually causes it to become structured. So we actually have structured water because of sunlight. And that's a form of, it's even, maybe we're slightly photosynthesizing, so it's another source of energy that we just think about food, proteins, carbs, and things like this. And actually sunlight is not only charging you, it's way more than just vitamin D that you're getting from sunlight. So the more people can get sunlight, it's a mood lifter, incredibly healing as well. So it seems so obvious, but we don't do it.
Well, there's so many simple things that we sometimes make health so complicated, and we break it down to so many pieces that I know several of my clients, they come in stressed because they feel like they have to do everything right, or that they're not doing something for their kids, that they're missing something. And it's hard to be a parent. It's hard to be a woman, a man, as a doctor, as a professional, or really whatever your life chooses. It's really having some self-acceptance. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, self-acceptance. And, so you made a really important point. So we've just talked about lots of things. People have got a lot of practical things they could do. We haven't just talked theoretically, have we? But then there's the risk of going to overwhelm. I've got all these things to do, and, so really with self-care and self-love, and just starting to change your lifestyle to make it supported, to understand how to create health in the body, it's the idea of we kind of do these things out of spontaneous self-care.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes something you get up and you love to do and you want to do it because it makes you feel better. So, and it might be there a little inertia to begin with, right? You know, you might need a bit of a push, a bit of discipline to begin with. But the idea should be that one of the best ones is like go to bed at night. If you've got a health issue going on, go to bed at 9:30, get the blue blocking glasses, they're only $10 on Amazon, go for campfire light, just do that. That's that one thing. And that can be life-changing for people. So then you get a feel for it. I call it like the more people can do a quick win, get a
Mm-hmm.
quick win, then they get and go, wow, I can't believe how good I feel. I'm more productive. I'm less groggy. I can focus. So just something simple like that. And so the idea is we ideally, I'm going to use the word should, try not to use the word should, but we want to do things out of spontaneous. It arises out of spontaneous self-care. So when we get into shoulds, we're missing the whole point of it. We kind of, all we've done is just used a survival strategy, which is should, must, have tos, lists of to-do lists and all that. So we want to kind of move away from that. And that's more of being driven like by this, more of a sensual experience of life. Whereas we've gone very mental, we get very intellectual. And that when we do that, that's also the disconnect, because the mind can get incredibly disconnected from our physical body's need and our emotions. So it kind of is actually learning to live your life from a more of a sensual, feeling-based, connected place, connected with the self and other people. That's how to create health. If you do that, if you're actually doing it. So yeah, it takes time to do it and no rush. What's the rush? Just, you know, from people listening to the summit, they're probably going to get a ton of different things to do. You know, come back and integrate one thing a week. Come back and do one thing a week, or maybe 3 things that you picked up from this next month kind of thing. And then eventually it all starts to build. There's no rush. You can't fail at it. Just, you know, eventually you'll just navigate and find out the perfect things that you need to do that are personalized to you. And there's no one fixed thing that works great for everybody. Everybody needs to do different things. They enjoy different things as well. But yeah, and then once people start doing it, they start to go, why didn't I do this before? Why didn't I do these things before? And you're like, well, welcome to the club. It's possible to feel great every day.
Well, Niki, it's interesting because my daughter Juliet and her friends, we were talking, they're all applying to colleges. And I said, well, I have 27 years of education. And they just looked at me like they couldn't believe it. But I must tell you, Niki, I think I've learned more about life in the last hour talking to you than I have in those 27 years of school.
Wow.
You have so much wisdom, and it's a wisdom of experience. And you've shared so many great ideas with our viewers today. And a very heartfelt thank you. It's a lot of wisdom that you have. And it's a pleasure to have this discussion with you. And I really feel that this is the kind of talk that we all need to have with someone like yourself. You really have a lot of wisdom to share with people. What are you excited about? What are you learning for yourself now? What's next for Niki Gratrix?
Well, so I am in the process. One of the things I'm loving doing at the moment is I'm actually writing a course, and it's
Great.
like 30-minute lesson once a week for 6 months. And it's covering all the things we've talked about. And it'll actually be available. People can stay in touch through my website and just sign up to my free newsletter. And I've got a free ebook that people can buy on my, a free ebook that people just download on my website as well, on overcoming emotional trauma from childhood.
Please share your website with everybody. How do they find you?
Yes, it's nikigratrix.com, NIKIGRATRIX.com. And so it's this course that I'm creating. I'm excited about that because I can't fit everything into a consultation. So you just find this, like, I need everything. I want people to be motivated, engaged to do things. So I do include a lot of science, just to say, look, here's 20 papers showing what the benefits of sun are. And then here's the simple practical to-dos kind of thing. So I don't have time to include all that in a consultation. So I'm kind of excited about that. So that will be coming out next year. And I'm probably going to launch a podcast next year that will kind of link with that too. So with the guests, and we're covering it completely multifactorial. So we'll do mind and body and social and the environment impacts. So yeah, that's I'm just busy writing right now.
Well, I'm excited about your course. It's something that I would take myself, and I encourage everybody to take a look at your website, because I think, again, the wisdom that you have, if you could put it into something that everyone can access, that's the beauty of our new electronic mediums, is that you can't do it one-to-one. You really can share it like we're doing in our discussion today.
Yes, that's so important. Like if you were to spend all of the time just with me one-to-one, it's that, or any practitioner, it'd be thousands of dollars. So the course and things like these summits are great ways to make it affordable to a wide range of people. So it's a huge service you're doing, as well with what you're doing here too.
Well, Niki Gratrix, thank you so much. You're full of great wisdom, and I greatly appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. It was wonderful. Thank you.